My daughter's baby shower was dazzling, but when I walked in, I realized my name wasn't even on the guest list. The sting was sharp, yet I held my head high, refusing to let humiliation define me. Quietly, I placed my proof of love and sacrifice exactly where no one could ignore it. They had no idea this was only the beginning of a reckoning long overdue. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. The mailbox squeaked as I pulled it open, the familiar rusted hinge groaning like an old friend who had grown tired of listening. Inside, sandwiched between grocery flyers and a utility bill, was a cream-colored envelope addressed to me. My name was there, though the handwriting was too careful, as if written by someone who didn't know it well. The postmark was from 3 weeks earlier. My daughter's baby shower invitation had arrived late, so late that I could already imagine the RSVP list being full, the seating chart drawn, the laughter shared without me. I stood at the curb with the envelope in my hand, the Texas sun pressing down against my shoulders, wondering how a mother could receive news of her own grandchild's celebration as an afterthought. I turned the envelope over twice, then slid a finger beneath the flap. The card was pretty, all pink watercolor blossoms and gold script. Please join us for a baby shower, honoring Celine. The date was circled in my mind before I even read it aloud. 1 week from now. If it had been sent on time, I would have had 3. I carried the envelope inside like a fragile piece of evidence. On the kitchen counter beside a stack of unopened mail, I laid it flat and smoothed the crease with my palm. For a long moment, I just looked at it. A part of me wanted to call Celine, immediately demand to know why the card was delayed. But another part, the part that had grown familiar with being set aside, kept quiet. I had learned that speaking up too quickly only gave others the chance to dismiss me twice. Dinner plates from yesterday still sat in the sink. I set the invitation upright against the salt shaker so I couldn't ignore it. My chest tightened and I told myself out loud, "You're still invited. That's something." It was a small consolation, and I heard the bitterness lacing my own voice. When my children were young, it was me who hosted the showers and birthdays, who baked the cakes and rented the tables. I remembered stringing lights across the backyard for Celine's 12th birthday, watching her run barefoot with her friends until twilight swallowed the sky. Back then, people leaned on me for details, the balloons, the centerpieces, the flow of the day. I wasn't an afterthought, I was the first thought. Now standing in my quiet kitchen, I felt the distance between then and now stretch like a taut rope. Those parties were filled with laughter, with neighbors bringing casseroles, with music spilling into the street. I used to believe that those memories would keep me woven into the fabric of their lives, but fabric frays no matter how careful the stitch. Later that night, I opened my phone to the family group chat. I scrolled through photos of pastel decorations, already purchased cupcakes in neat rows, a game list scribbled on a whiteboard, and there, tucked between comments, was my name misspelled, careless as though I were a distant cousin, rather than the woman who had carried Celine into the world. Don't forget to remind Rowana Armand had typed using the wrong spelling. No one corrected him. They went on chatting, layering more plans, leaving me silent at the bottom of the thread. It wasn't the mistake itself that stung. It was the absence of recognition, the easy way everyone skipped past it. I felt humiliation bloom in my chest like a bruise. I hovered my thumbs above the keyboard, tempted to correct them, tempted to announce myself. But what good would it do? Would Celine roll her eyes? Would the others pretend it wasn't important? Instead, I closed the app. The glow of the screen left my hands cold. I set the phone down on the table and stared at it. My reflection caught in the black screen, a woman with lines deepened from years of holding back words. The silence was heavy, but it felt safer than typing a message I'd regret. I folded my arms and sat still, my back pressing into the wooden chair. Sometimes the strongest statement you can make is no statement at all. I had repeated that lesson to myself enough times over the years, whenever life pressed me to swallow disappointment. Tonight it was my only shield. By evening, I moved through the motions of making dinner boiling pasta, opening a jar of sauce, setting one plate on the dining table. The table once seated 6, then 4, then 2. Now it was just me. I pulled out the chair opposite mine as though leaving a space for someone unseen. The lamp above cast a soft circle of light, and the empty chair glared back at me, a reminder of how quickly a mother becomes a guest in her child's life. I twirled the pasta slowly, each bite bland despite the red sauce. Across the room, the invitation still stood on the counter, its gold lettering catching the light. I tried to imagine Celine's smile as she planned her shower the way her hands might rest protectively on her belly. I wanted to be there for that, even if my seat was by the restroom or in the back row. Before bed, I carried the envelope to my room and placed it on the nightstand. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I brushed my teeth, turned back the covers, and slid into bed with the invitation beside me, like an unwanted companion. I stared at the ceiling, letting the shadows stretch across the plaster. The thought came sharp but steady I would go. I would show up no matter how late the invitation, no matter how clumsy the spelling of my name. I would be present. Because even when overlooked, a mother's place is not erased. I reached out, tapped the envelope with 2 fingers, and whispered to myself, "Better late than never." The next morning, sunlight slid through the blinds of my small Houston home. My phone buzzed on the nightstand where I had left the crumpled invitation. I reached for it slowly, still half heavy from a restless sleep. The screen lit up with a new message from Armand. "Please keep it simple. Don't dress too flashy. We don't want attention pulled away from Celine. This is her day, not yours." I froze reading the words. Once then again, the way you turn over a shard of glass to confirm it really cut you. His tone was crisp, almost polite, yet the undertone stung sharper than an outright insult. He had managed to say, "You are an embarrassment. Be invisible." I stared at the screen as my chest tightened. My hands, once steady from years of grading essays and guiding teenagers through Shakespeare and Steinbeck, trembled slightly now. I placed the phone face down. For a long moment, silence filled the house. I thought I was past being shocked by the little humiliations that came my way, but somehow they always found a fresh angle. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee cooling between my palms, and thought back to the years when Celine was small. I remembered the time she was 7, and we were preparing for her school recital. I had stayed up late sewing ribbons onto her dress because she wanted to sparkle just a little. Back then, her joy was all that mattered. I was mother, seamstress, cheerleader, audience, all rolled into one. Now, decades later, a single line from her husband reduced me to an afterthought, an inconvenience to be managed. I had raised Celine with dignity, teaching her that grace mattered more than appearances. Was this her lesson twisted back at me, or had she simply forgotten who once stood in the wings clapping the loudest I carried the phone to the dresser where my clothes hung? Instead of letting his message dictate shame, I made a deliberate choice. I pulled out a simple navy dress, not new but clean and pressed. I laid out a cream cardigan, its sleeves worn soft from years of Sunday services. I polished my shoes until they shone, not for anyone's approval, but as a quiet act of self-respect. In the driveway, I checked my old sedan, wiping the windshield with an old rag filling the tank. The car had seen me through parent-teacher conferences, hospital runs, and holiday trips. It had never once abandoned me. Unlike people, it did not choose when to leave me out. I whispered to myself, "You will go. You will walk in with your head high. And if they look past you, that's their choice." A few days later, I set out early for Austin, the road stretching ahead beneath a pale blue sky. Somewhere along Highway 71, traffic slowed. As I drew closer, I saw a sleek silver car pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. A woman stood beside it, tapping her phone in frustration. She was striking late 50s elegant, her hair swept into a careful bun. Even from the road, I recognized her face from news features in Indira Vale, the tech mogul who had built an empire of apps and investments out of Austin. I could have driven past telling myself she had more resources than I ever would, but something in her expression, a flicker of weariness beneath the polished exterior, made me pull over. "Need a hand?" I asked, stepping out. She looked up surprised. "The roadside service says 40 minutes. My meeting can't wait that long." Together we bent over the hood. My old sedan's trunk carried jumper cables, duct tape, even a jug of water, leftovers from years of cautious road trips. With a little patience, a quick refill, and a steady hand, her car roared back to life. Indira exhaled, almost laughing with relief. "You're a lifesaver. Most people just drive by." "Most people assume someone else will stop," I replied, brushing grease from my fingers. Her gaze lingered on me, not in pity, but in genuine curiosity. "What's your name, Rowena?" She repeated it slowly, as though memorizing it. "Rowena, I owe you." I smiled faintly. "No debts, just pay it forward." We exchanged no more than a handshake, yet, as she drove off, I sensed something had shifted. The encounter left a warmth in my chest, a reminder that even when dismissed by my own family, a stranger could still see me, not as a burden, but as a presence. By the time I merged back onto the highway, the weight of Armand's message had dulled. My car hummed steadily, carrying me toward Austin. I still dreaded the baby shower, the sideways glances, the corrections, the unspoken rules about who I should or should not be. But tucked inside that dread was now a sliver of hope, an unexpected thread tying me to someone who had noticed me in a moment when I could have easily been invisible. I had no idea that stopping to help her would echo inside that glittering venue more loudly than any toast or slideshow could. The event hall in Austin gleamed like something out of a bridal magazine. White stone pillars rose high around the entryway, pastel balloons, and silver streamers lining the wide glass doors. My heels clicked across the polished sidewalk as I stepped forward, clutching the invitation like proof that I belonged. My palms were damp, though I told myself it was only the spring heat. At the check-in desk, a young attendant smiled mechanically and slid a manicured finger down the printed guest list. Her smile faltered. She scrolled again, eyes narrowing, then asked me to repeat my name. I spoke clearly, careful with each syllable. She checked once more, then whispered to the woman beside her, who glanced at me with polite confusion. "I don't see her here," the attendant said softly, though the softness did nothing to blunt the sting. A murmur drifted from behind. "Maybe she's staff." My face burned, and for a heartbeat I considered walking out right then. Before I could gather myself, Armand appeared immaculate in a gray suit, his hand resting casually on the desk. "She's with us," he said, as if I were luggage being retrieved. His tone was smooth enough for the staff, but I heard the edge meant for me. I swallowed hard, nodded, and let the moment slide past without protest. The attendant handed me a flimsy paper bracelet, the same kind given to caterers and decorators. I slipped it on quietly, though inside my pride cracked. It wasn't the oversight that cut deep, it was the implication. Without Armand's vouch, I did not exist here. Stepping into the hall, I felt a sudden chill despite the hum of chatter and the warmth of the lights. The space was breathtaking. Lavender linens draped over tables, floral centerpieces blooming with roses, and lilies' silver trays glistening under chandeliers. Laughter rippled from clusters of guests who embraced one another, swapping stories. No one looked my way. Not one smile stretched in welcome. I slowed my steps, each one echoing louder in my ears. For a fleeting moment, I remembered hosting Celine's birthdays in our old Houston backyard, stringing up Christmas lights, baking sheet cakes, and singing until neighbors leaned over fences. Back then, I was the center of her world. Now I was a shadow moving through someone else's celebration. Finally, I spotted a table card with my name misspelled small and tucked beside a restroom door, where the scent of disinfectant floated each time it swung open. I stood staring numb. The card was bent as though placed in haste. The nearby chairs were half empty, not the kind where honored guests linger, but the ones chosen by latecomers or those hoping to slip away unnoticed. Anger prickled through me quick and hot. Then I forced my hands to steady as I smoothed the card down, sat and folded my napkin. They wanted invisibility for me. I would give them silence, but on my terms. From my corner seat, I scanned the room. Celine stood in the center, radiant in a blush gown, one hand resting on her round belly. Friends surrounded her, cooing over the decorations and shower games, voices rising with affection. Armand hovered nearby, smirking like a man who had orchestrated perfection. Aunts, cousins, neighbors, all clustered together close enough to hear each other's jokes. And me, I was stationed on the edge as if proximity to the restroom was an acceptable metaphor for my place in their lives. But from here, I saw everything. Every whisper, every glance, every detail of the room they thought I was too far to notice. I leaned back, folding my arms lightly. The sting still lingered, but beneath it a sharper awareness formed. They thought pushing me to the margins would silence me. But silence has teeth. They had seated me by the restroom, but I knew the real stench would soon come from the truth they tried to bury. The lobby shimmered with pastel flowers, their stems arranged in tall crystal vases, framing a massive seating chart. Guests lingered there, pointing, laughing softly, reading the elegant calligraphy that confirmed their place of belonging. I stepped closer, tracing the letters with my eyes, row by row, table by table. Celine's friends, Armand's colleagues, cousins, and in-laws, all neatly inscribed in loops of gold ink. But not me. My name was absent. Not misplaced, not abbreviated, absent. At the bottom corner, a polite note read, "Overflow table assignments will be adjusted at check-in." The words were tidy, impersonal, but the message was sharp. Invisibility was not an accident. It was the design. A choice had been made long before I walked through these doors. I turned toward a staffer adjusting ribbons on a bouquet. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice low, steady. Was there perhaps a printing error? "My name isn't listed." Her smile bloomed too quickly, too wide. "Oh, we'll find you somewhere comfortable," she assured, tilting her head toward the back of the hall. Her hand waved vaguely as if comfort could be assigned like a spare chair. I nodded, thanked her anyway. Dignity costs me nothing, I thought, though each word tasted like chalk. Back at the corner near the restroom, I found my place card again, my name bent into cramped letters. I had barely settled into the chair when a pair of VIP guests swept in, diamond bracelets catching the light, their laughter rich. A supervisor hurried behind them, spotted the shortage, and with a soft apology lifted my card. "Just a slight adjustment, ma'am," she said, already sliding me further back. My card landed near the swinging service door. The draft carried with it detergent air, the clatter of trays, a faint metallic clang each time the kitchen bustled. I sat still, my hands folded over the napkin. Silence stretched around me, not surrender, but record-keeping. Each slight was ink in a ledger I would never misplace. I fingered the folded baby blanket inside my tote, the one I had kept since Celine's first days. For a moment, I considered leaving, saving myself the humiliation. But the image of a child yet unborn, my grandchild, anchored me. I had not come for applause or recognition. I had come to bear witness. So I smoothed the napkin, squared my shoulders, and decided to remain exactly where they placed me. From my station at the margin, I could see everything. Celine glowed under the pastel arch friends, orbiting her in careful choreography. Armand stood nearby, his hand brushing shoulders, his laugh booming as he performed host. The scene was seamless if you agreed with their casting, if you accepted that some players were pushed off stage. I measured the distance between us not in feet, but in choices. Each one had moved me farther from the circle, and yet here I sat still within view. The AV team tested the screen at the front. The title slide appeared in lilac script, Celine a Life in Pictures. The first thumbnail glowed faintly. Celine at 6 years old, clutching her school medal, smiling wide under the Texas sun. I remembered the exact day. I had stood behind the camera, framing her small shoulders, my voice calling encouragement. I leaned back and waited. Would the photographer remain in the frame or be erased as neatly as my name from the chart? From my new seat by the swinging door, I braced for the slideshow, and for whatever part of our story they intended to erase next. The lights dimmed and the hall fell into a hush. From my seat beside the swinging service door, shadows cloaked me more than usual. A spotlight of attention glowed on the screen at the front of the room. I folded my hands in my lap, steadying myself, waiting to see how my daughter's life would be told. The slideshow opened with cheerful music, soft and glittering like bells that belonged to someone else's childhood. I wanted to believe I would see myself just once standing at her side, yet already I felt a shiver of unease ripple through me. The photographs came one after another, Celine at 5, blowing out birthday candles, Celine in a tiny soccer uniform with pigtails bouncing Celine at the beach, with sandcastles toppling. In every frame I remembered my place. I was the one who carried the cake into the room, the one who tied those shoelaces, the one who knelt in the sand beside her. But in the slideshow, I had vanished. Cropped edges, angles, hiding me credits, whispered to others. Guests leaned forward and murmured admiration for the perfect family story unfolding before them. Each picture struck like a silent erasure. Then came the story that sealed it. A smiling caption scrolled across the screen, Celine and the Stray Cat, a beloved memory, as told by Grandma Patricia. The photo showed my daughter cradling a tiny gray kitten, her hair tousled from sleep. My throat closed. That was my story. I was the one who carried that cat home in my coat, who fed it warm milk at the kitchen counter, while Celine begged to keep it. For years, Celine repeated that tale as a bedtime favorite. Now, under the applause of strangers, the moment belonged to someone else. Patricia waved modestly as the audience clapped, and I sat frozen, swallowing the rage that threatened to break my silence. Across the room, I caught Armand's eye. He leaned in his chair, lips twitching into the faintest smirk, a look meant for me alone. Celine avoided my gaze, her smile pasted broad for the crowd, her posture stiff, as though aware of the theft but unwilling to intervene. The betrayal lay heavy in the air. This was not oversight. This was design. They wanted the narrative neat, polished free of the woman who had raised her through storms and hunger. My chair at the back had not been punishment enough. Now they scrubbed me from her story altogether. I clutched my tote tightly, my knuckles pale. For one raw instant, I nearly rose, nearly demanded correction, nearly shouted the truth into the glowing room. But I stayed still. To interrupt would be to play the fool on their stage. My silence, I reminded myself, was not surrender. It was strategy. I would not give them the satisfaction of labeling me difficult or unhinged. They could paint over my presence, but they could not erase the evidence I carried with me, the years, the memories, and more tangible proof they had not considered. As the applause subsided, I took a breath and leaned back. Pain burned, but so did resolve. History has a way of circling back, of showing its true frame when least expected. Tonight they had stolen credit-cropped images, rewritten the story. But truth is patient. Truth waits, and I had never been afraid of waiting. They thought erasing me from pictures would erase me from memory, but I had kept evidence they never imagined. The lights rose again, and applause swelled like a wave rolling across the hall. Guests laughed, clapped, and leaned toward one another, speaking warmly about the slideshow they had just witnessed. I sat still, my hands folded, as if glued to the arms of my chair by an invisible weight. The tote resting against my leg felt heavier than it should, as though it carried not just photographs and film, but the very burden of my erased history. My chest was hollow, but within that hollow space, a spark of determination flickered sharper than the sting of humiliation. I lowered my hand into the tote and brushed my fingers against the worn envelopes tucked carefully inside. Decades-old negatives slid beneath my touch, their edges sharp, delicate, irreplaceable. There were prints, too. Celine, with frosting on her nose at her 7th birthday. Celine leaning into my shoulder on a school field trip, Celine holding the kitten Patricia had claimed as her story. The images in my tote were untouched, unedited, impossible to crop me out of. Each photo was a thread pulled from the fabric of truth proof that I had always been there. As the crowd cheered for a version of history where I did not exist, I steadied myself by gripping the truth only I carried. Movement at the corner of my vision drew my gaze upward. A silver-haired woman from Selena's church drifted close, balancing a glass of iced tea. She leaned toward me discreetly, her voice low meant only for my ears. "You were always there?" she whispered, eyes kind. "I remember you at the Sunday picnics, the bake sales. Don't let them take that away from you." Her words landed like a hand extended to a drowning swimmer. For a brief moment I felt seen not by Selene, not by Armand, but by someone who had no stake in the politics of my family. It was only a small acknowledgement, but it shimmered like a lifeline. From across the room, Armand's gaze cut sharp as glass. He had noticed. His smirk, usually so quick, faltered into something tighter, calculating. I saw suspicion flicker in his eyes like a man who sensed a hidden weapon. He didn't know what I carried in my tote, but he knew I was not defenseless. His look was not one of concern for my feelings, but of fear for his control. That glance told me everything he was watching, and he would not underestimate me again. My silence unsettled him more than any outburst could have. I drew a slow breath, grounding myself in patience. Timing, I reminded myself, was everything. To pull out the photographs now to confront them in the middle of their celebration would make me the disruptor they wanted me to be. Instead, I stayed seated, my fingers tapping against the sealed envelope like a drumbeat of restraint. I watched closely who had clapped most enthusiastically for Patricia's false memory, who had shifted uncomfortably in their seats, who avoided looking at me at all. Every detail was another entry in the quiet ledger I was keeping proof, not just of my past, but of their present complicity. I closed my eyes for a breath, hearing the murmur of voices, the clink of glasses, the shuffle of waiters moving trays. Inside my chest, pain had steadied into resolve. The truth was not fragile. It was mine, solid and unshakable. In silence, I repeated to myself, "The truth is in my hands. When I speak, they won't just hear me, they'll see me." The proof rested in my tote, but the real challenge would be choosing the moment to let it breathe. The servers rolled out a towering cake, each pastel tier ringed with sugar flowers, while sparklers hissed and spat bright points of light. Phones lifted in a glittering canopy, laughter scattered like confetti. From my seat by the swinging service door, a little wind brushed my sleeve and carried the cake's warm vanilla scent. I laced my fingers together and reminded myself this was a baby shower, not a hearing. Still, something in my ribs drew tight. I braced for the part that always stings more than frosting. Selene took the microphone. Beneath the chandeliers, her dress caught the light and threw it back, all shine and promise. She thanked friends who flew in mentors, who opened doors Armand's parents by name, even a college roommate who once kept her plants alive for a summer. I listened for a simple syllable, Mom. The river of gratitude curved around the stone of my existence and continued on. My name never surfaced. I kept my face calm, the smile I have learned for awkward rooms, while inside that old familiar ache rose up like a tide. Armand slipped beside her, one arm draped over her shoulders as if he owned the stage. "And let's toast," he said, voice easy, smile wide to the family who made it. Eventually, the room erupted. Some guests laughed too loudly, eager to align themselves with charm. Others looked at their napkins and chuckled as if compelled. Heat climbed my neck. A joke is just a blade asking for permission. From where I sat, the cake gleamed uncut, and I felt sliced anyway. Reactions rolled over me in small waves. A table of young coworkers snorted into their champagne flutes. A cousin of Armand's shot me a glance that landed and bounced away like a pebble. The churchwoman who had given me a quiet word earlier pressed her lips together and shook her head once. No one said my name. That was the cage not steel, but expectation. Mothers do not interrupt. Mothers do not call foul. Mothers hold still while the scenery moves them off stage. I steadied my breath and traced the ledger in my mind. Missing from the guest list, parked by the restroom, relocated to the service door, edited out of the slideshow. A bedtime story reassigned to a woman who never cleaned a litter box. And now a room full of laughter bending around one small truth. I gave birth to the woman they were praising. They can erase me from speeches, but they cannot change her blood. That fact is older than Armand's grin and steadier than applause. Sparklers fizzled out. A hush fell and someone produced a knife with a ribbon tied around the handle. People leaned forward, eager for the slice, the wishes, the sugar. I made no wish. I do not bargain with people who cut with compliments. Instead, I counted the breaths it took for my pulse to slow. I thought of the envelope of negatives resting in my tote, the church woman's nod, the way silence can build a spine when you let it. My hands were steady. So was my memory. Armand fed Celine a bite and dabbed her cheek with theatrical sweetness. The crowd adored it. Flashbulbs popped. In the pictures, I knew I would be a blur at the edge if I appeared at all. But edges see angles centers miss. From here, I could read who performed affection, who watched the door, who measured the political temperature of the room before they laughed. All of it would matter later. A server set a slice in front of me, pink as the inside of a shell. I lifted my fork and tasted sugar that somehow managed to be both delicate and cloying prettiness without depth. Around me, plates chimed and chairs scraped. I chewed, swallowed, and found the sweetness fading fast. What stayed was something flinty. They could set the tone. I would set the record. Not tonight, not with a knife poised over frosting, but soon when truth could not be mistaken for a tantrum. Candles smoked to thin threads and vanished. Applause swelled again, softer this time. The room sated. I rose only enough to smooth my skirt and sit taller. If they meant to bury me under charm, they had misjudged the ground. Laughter doesn't hide a foundation. It only shakes the dust loose. And I am older than their performance. I have outlasted storms gentler than this and cruelties far worse. They thought their laughter would bury me, but every chuckle only carved the truth deeper. Across the room, the MC guided a trivia game about Celine's childhood favorite foods. First pet the street where we lived when she lost her first tooth. Hands shot up. Wrong answers flew with confidence. I sat very still and let strangers rename my corners. When someone guessed the pet was a golden retriever, I tasted the truth on my tongue. Tabby Cat Winter of second-grade cardboard box, lined with an old sweater of mine. I kept that sweater for years, stitched at the elbows, smelling faintly of cedar after I stored it every summer. Memory is a patient archivist. Even when people misfile the facts, it keeps the originals in a locked drawer. I would decide when to open it. I let the room lift and settle like tide. A baby squealed, a cork sighed. I have been many things, teacher, widow, mother, but now I chose to be an archivist. Let them improvise the headline. I would keep receipts, names, times. When it was time, I would not shout. I would open a door and let the truth walk in. I folded the napkin once more and let the moment settle light as dust on bone. The clink of glass against glass carried like a bell, sharp and bright as servers glided through the hall. Silver trays shimmered beneath the chandeliers, each one lined with crystal flutes that caught the light and fractured it into gold. Guests reached eagerly, hands raised like children waiting for candy. The trays moved from table to table in practiced arcs until one passed mine. The server's eyes skimmed over me, her tray tilting slightly away, and then she was gone. My hands rested on the linen empty. The omission was smooth, almost rehearsed, subtle enough that no one might notice unless they were looking directly at me. But I felt the hollow like a stone in my chest. Exclusion can be as delicate as it is deliberate. Across the room, Celine stood radiant, the glow of celebration wrapping around her like a cloak. She pressed a glass to her lips but paused, waiting. Armand raised his flute high, his posture easy, drawing eyes, as though he'd rehearsed under stage lights. Guests mirrored him, the crystal forest, rising reflections, catching in painted nails and wedding rings. I picked up my water glass cool against my palm. It wasn't champagne, but it was something. I lifted it just high enough to keep from looking petty, though the sting curled inside me. Armand cleared his throat. To Celine, he began his grin, wide and easy, who's about to become the best mother the world has ever seen. A chorus of cheers followed, bubbles hissing in glasses. He let the noise fall before continuing. And since we're talking about mothers, I think we all remember. I felt my stomach drop. The tone was wrong, too playful, too rehearsed. His words came smoothly. Back in the day, Selena used to wait outside school, sitting on those stone steps, because Mom was working late again. He chuckled, inviting the room to join. She'd wait so long the janitor would walk her to the bus stop. You can't make this stuff up. Laughter rippled soft at first, then louder, like leaves catching wind. Heads nodded. Some guests sighed in mock sympathy. The falsehood landed as fact painted in bright, careless strokes. I sat perfectly still, though every muscle tightened, as if bracing for a storm. The truth burned at the edges of my throat. I was there. I had never left her waiting like that. I kept the signed report card from that year tucked between photo negatives, a simple proof of my presence. I remembered the smell of chalk dust, the way Selene's hand fit into mine as we crossed the parking lot. I had walked her home. I had been there. But in this room, my history was being re-scripted as neglect. Celine's reaction was the sharpest cut. She smiled faintly, eyes cast downward, and did not correct him. Her silence was consent, her complicity louder than his lie. The guests applauded the story, their laughter fading into an easy hum. But my daughter's silence echoed in me longer than the sound of their glasses touching. She knew the truth. She lived it. Yet she let it be rewritten without lifting a word in defense. I did not rise. I did not argue. I let the glass of water cool in my hand. My silence was not surrender. It was strategy. I tallied every distortion, every false anecdote, and marked it carefully in the ledger I kept in my mind. They were building a theater of lies, and I was letting them construct it brick by brick. When the time came, I would not chip at the walls with protests. I would drop the truth like a wrecking ball. The toast ended with a final clatter of glassware. Sparkling liquid slipped down throats, washing lies into celebration. My glass of water was still half-full, condensation dampening the linen. They drank to a version of me that never existed, but I held the receipts in my tote. They thought exclusion and false stories would bury me, but I knew better. Truth does not die because it's ignored. It waits patient and undeniable, like the negatives in their envelopes, like the documents I had saved across decades. They drank to lies, but I was holding the receipts. They wanted to rewrite history, but they would soon learn I kept the original draft. The music stumbled as if the playlist itself sensed a disruption. Notes faltered, then dipped into a silence heavy enough to pull every head toward the entrance. I sat still at my table by the service door, my posture deliberate, my senses sharpening with each second. Conversations broke mid-sentence. Forks hovered above half-eaten slices of cake. There was no announcement, only the sudden hush that tells you the air itself has changed. From where I sat, I felt the ripple before the name even formed on someone's lips. It spread like a current moving through the crowd. One woman near the arch breathed it first, then another repeated it louder, her hand clutching her phone like proof. Vera. The name rolled across the room, charged with a reverence that could shift a gathering's center of gravity in an instant. Guests craned their necks. Some already had their cameras raised screens, glowing like a constellation of artificial stars. Even the staff stiffened back straighter, as if rehearsed for royalty. I did not shift an inch. My palms pressed together, resting quietly on the tote in my lap, my eyes narrowing just slightly as I observed. The master of ceremonies nearly stumbled in her rush, forward heels clattering against the glossy floor. Her smile was wide-rehearsed and eager to harness the moment. Selene's lips parted, then pressed into a brittle smile again. I knew that expression. It was the face she used when a situation slid out of her control, the mask covering panic. Beside her, Armand leaned in close, jaw tight, whispering words too low to carry but heavy enough to anchor her posture. I recognized that grip, too controlled, disguised as comfort. Through the shuffle and the low tide of whispers, Vera's presence cut cleanly. She was not rushed, not nervous. She walked with the assurance of someone used to being recognized. Her gaze moved across the crowd like a searchlight, steady and unhurried. Then for the briefest moment, her eyes locked with mine. Even in my shadowed corner, she found me. She gave a small, deliberate nod so slight it could have been missed, but it wasn't. It landed squarely inside me, grounding me as if the invisible walls of exclusion had just cracked. Then the crowd swallowed her, pulling her toward the pastel arch, dripping with balloons and flowers. I remained seated still as stone, but my breath drew deeper. Something had shifted. The MC's voice swelled, overly bright, layered with gratitude that rang hollow. Ladies and gentlemen, what a surprise, Vera. A leader in innovation, a philanthropist, a pioneer of technology has joined us this afternoon. Applause erupted, though it was edged with the greedy clamor of guests, eager to be seen applauding. Cameras flashed the shimmer of sequins and pastel decor bouncing under the light. I kept my expression steady, hands folded tightly. When the chorus is too loud, silence can cut sharper than any word. Yet Vera did not let herself be smothered in the MC's gush. She lifted her hand palm forward, and the sound of her gesture alone silenced the room faster than any microphone. Her voice, calm but resonant, cut through the applause. Before we move forward, I must say something. She paused just long enough to draw the crowd closer. This morning, on the side of the highway, I was stranded. Cars flew past, people looked, but kept going. Except for one. Murmurs rose instantly, the suspense undeniable. She continued. A woman pulled over, gave her time and her calm when I had neither. She asked nothing in return. She saved me hours of trouble and showed me grace. The applause that followed was not the planned kind. It was awkward at first, hesitant until realization swept over the room. I saw guests glance at me, faces altering as though a fog had lifted. In my corner, I sat still, but the air around me brightened in their perception. Phones lowered, whispers hushed. For the first time that afternoon, the room had been forced to acknowledge a truth no seating chart could erase. The MC tried to reclaim the moment, fumbling through lines about generosity and our shared celebration. But the story had already rooted itself. Guests tilted their heads toward me, some with surprise, others with subtle recognition. The invisibility cloak they had draped over me began to fray, thread by thread. Selene's smile faltered again, a tremor breaking through the practiced brightness. Her hands tightened over her stomach, knuckles pale under the skin. Armand's jaw locked. His grin stretched so thin it nearly split. He leaned toward the MC again, his voice carrying this time. Let's bring it back to the celebration. Today is about Selene. But his tone lacked its usual confidence. A shadow of uncertainty crossed his face just enough for me to note. And me, I did not stand. I did not wave or nod or bask in borrowed light. I stayed seated in my corner, the tote heavy across my lap like a sealed vault. Timing is its own weapon. I let Vera's words travel unadorned, unclaimed, because the truth is stronger when you don't force it. I felt the power in restraint. Let them sit in their unease. Let them realize the script had slipped. Vera had handed the room a truth they couldn't laugh away, couldn't edit from photographs, couldn't spin as neglect. She had given them something undeniable, and I knew when the time came, I would set it in stone. The room held itself perfectly still, as if even the air refused to move without permission. From my chair by the service door, I saw shoulders tilt toward the stage phones, lifted, faces lifted, all of us waiting on a single voice. Vera steadied the microphone with a patience that quieted the last clinks of glass. I felt the weight of my tote against my lap, steady, pulsing like a second heartbeat, reminding me to stay composed. This is a celebration, she began, and celebrations are mirrors. They show us who we are when we believe we are being watched. Her tone was gentle but not soft, the kind of voice that folds a room into attention. She spoke of children learning not from speeches, but from how we treat one another in the unlit corners. She did not use my name. She didn't need to. The crowd leaned in, as if proximity could earn them a measure of her gravity. Then she drew a breath that felt like a line being drawn on the floor. This morning, she said, I was stranded on the shoulder of the highway. Cars flew past. Some slowed to look, then sped away. One did not. A woman pulled over. She took off her coat, wrapped it around my shoulders, and set about solving the problem. There was wind. There was grit. There was kindness without paperwork. The room let out a hush that sounded like relief and shame, arriving at the same time. She explained the dead battery, the jumper cables, the way she was waved off when she tried to pay. She said, "You'll be fine now," and left before I could even ask her name. Then Vera looked toward my corner. She is here. The words landed like a gavel. Gasps scattered across the room. Someone said too clearly, "That's her," and 100 angles of vision found the shadowed corner where I sat. I did not move. I let their eyes adjust. I let truth take the shape of my outline without help from my hands. Vera did not yield the moment to applause. If today is to honor motherhood, she said, then let us honor a mother who arrived with the smell of engine grease on her fingers because she would not leave a stranger alone. She pointed the microphone toward the room, not at me, but through me. Kindness under pressure is the measure of any family's legacy. A slideshow can celebrate us, but our choices define us. The applause rose, not tidy, not cued by the MC, but tidal, starting in pockets, swelling until even the back tables joined. Across the aisle, I saw Cressida's smile turn glassy. Celine's mouth trembled before she captured it, then failed to capture it again. Armand's jaw calcified into a smile that did not reach his eyes. A server approached my table and set down a single flute of champagne, nodding once in a small act of correction. The crystal looked out of place beside my water glass, but I left it where it was a marker, planted by someone who understood that silence can be repaired with small, wordless bridges. I stayed seated. I did not wave for the cameras. I did not dab my eyes. Inside me, a long-held breath finally exhaled, released from a place older than this day. I remembered the nights I graded papers after midnight while Celine slept. I remembered the mornings I packed lunches and paid past due bills and chose presence over pride. Vindication. I learned a long time ago does not need volume. It needs a witness. Today I had one, and I would not cheapen it by performing gratitude for the same audience. The program stuttered. The MC attempted to reclaim the line of the afternoon voice cheery, syntax scrambling. We are so grateful for all the stories of generosity in this room," she said, hands fluttering. "In fact, we have reserved seating up front for our honored guests." An usher half bowed beside me and gestured toward a row nearer the stage. A path cleared. I thanked him, meaning it, and then I stayed where I was. You can accept an apology without moving from your place. Mine would be accepted by remaining. Vera lowered the microphone and looked straight at me, not with pity, but with recognition, the kind that says, I see what they tried to make small. I see that it isn't. The room released from the spell of her voice, loosened into talk again, but the talk was changed. Laughter tried to restart and faltered like a match struck against damp wood. I touched the tote for a steadying second, feeling the edges of envelopes, the stiffness of old photographs. Proof is useful. Character is truer. I carried both. I had come to bear witness, and I would finish that task with care. There would be a time to step forward. Let the revelation settle. Let the crowd turn the story over in their hands and hear the ring of it. A child learns by watching. If my grandchild someday asks what love looks like when it has been bruised, I want the answer to be clear. Love stands its ground without shouting, and it keeps its coat ready for the next cold shoulder on a roadside. I took a sip of water, left the champagne untouched, and listened to the applause ebb into a charged hush. In that hush, I could hear reputations moving the soft drag of old narratives being pushed from their pedestals. The day had been rewritten with a single paragraph spoken into a microphone. I adjusted my posture square at the edge of my chair and let calmness be the message I sent back across the room. I thought of the long road that had carried us here, the lunches packed the parent conferences, the rides home hard days, and of how easily a story can turn if one person refuses to look away. Today, they looked. Yes. The MC's voice carried across the banquet hall, pitched a little too high, a little too brittle. Mrs. Crow, would you join the family at the head table? His hand swept toward me as though offering a prize, but the tone was more command than courtesy. I felt every pair of eyes follow as I rose from my corner by the swinging service door. The linen of my dress whispered against itself, steadying me as I walked the aisle between tables. Some guests smiled with thin sympathy, others looked away quickly, but all of them murmured soft currents of judgment that hummed in the air like static. My tote weighed heavy at my side, not a burden, but ballast. I was not walking into a welcome. I was walking into a reckoning. Celine shifted uncomfortably as I approached, though her smile clung stubbornly to her lips. Armand pulled out the spare chair between them, his posture stiff, jawline rigid. The scrape of wood against parquet floor was louder than it should have been, a sound that made my spine tingle. I folded my hands on the table and waited. Celine cleared her throat and leaned toward the microphone set on its stand. First, I want to thank everyone again for being here today. It means so much to us. Her tone was syrupy, but her eyes flickered restlessly, searching the faces of the crowd. And of course, we appreciate Vera's kind story earlier. A pause long enough for a ripple of unease to pass through the room. But let's remember, this is about new life, about family joy. We don't want any distractions from what today is supposed to celebrate. The word distractions landed like a stone. I sat very still watching her. She tried to shift the spotlight to reframe what Vera had given as a gift into a disruption, but her voice wavered too thin to mask the edge. Armand leaned closer, his smile tight. Yes, we're grateful to Vera, of course. But well, sometimes lateness has consequences, and sometimes people use moments to, make things about themselves. We wouldn't want that, right? His laugh was hollow, brittle. A few guests chuckled politely, but most remained silent. Then came the crack. A guest from the second row spoke up clear enough to Carrie, but she was late because she helped Vera, wasn't she? That's what we just heard. Another guest chimed in, recalling how Celine had been laughing by the stage during Vera's delayed arrival. The contradiction sliced open Selena's defense like a seam. Celine flushed crimson. That's not, you don't understand the whole story, she stammered. Her hands fluttered nervously. Armand placed his palm over hers, but his grip looked more like restraint than comfort. The murmurs thickened, filling the air with skepticism. I could have spoken then. I could have cut through with words. But I chose a different blade. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my tote. The faint rustle of paper drew eyes. I slid a large envelope onto the linen, its weight undeniable, its edges square and sharp like a verdict waiting to be read. Armand's eyes narrowed. "What's that?" he demanded, his voice lower now, but the microphone caught it and magnified his unease. "This," I said quietly, "is not theater. This is record." With measured hands, I opened the envelope and spread its contents on the table, notarized statements, embossed seals catching the light official signatures, black and immutable. The documents detailed my continued co-ownership and beneficiary status in the house fund Armand and Celine had paraded as solely theirs. Bank transfers, receipts of my contributions, and a signed letter retaining my legal interest. Each sheet was a stone laid carefully on the scale, tipping it. The air cracked. Guests leaned forward, phones lifted to capture the sudden tableau. Celine froze her eyes, darting over the pages without comprehension. Armand stiffened his knuckles, whitening as he gripped the chair's arm. The MC stammered into his microphone, Perhaps we should return to the program." But his voice quavered like tissue in wind. I did not raise my voice. I did not even move beyond pushing the papers into the light. Silence worked for me. It filled the space until the only sound was the sharp intake of breath after each guest recognized the seal, the signature, the evidence. Cressida, the MC, tried to smile again, but her mouth betrayed her twitching into a grimace. Selena's lips parted, but no words came. The narrative they had written with such care unraveled strand by strand. I lifted my glass of water, took a slow sip, and placed it down again. I met no one's eyes, not even Vera's across the hall, though I felt her gaze steady on me. Dignity, I reminded myself, costs nothing but yields everything. I had not come to gloat or to crush. I had come to anchor truth in a room bent on fiction. The murmurs grew into a restless tide. A guest in the back muttered, "So all this time." Another whispered, "She kept receipts. Phones kept recording." The story had slipped out of Celine and Armand's control, and now it was alive in the air, untamable. I rested my hands atop the envelope, calm as stone. This paper was not revenge, it was proof, and proof does not need applause. It needs only to exist. Then came the scrape of a chair against parquet, sudden and loud, cutting through the buzz. Someone was rising, ready to challenge, ready to turn the reckoning into something no longer polite. I sat very still, steady, unyielding. The reckoning had only just begun. The hall had changed. A few minutes earlier, the air had been electric tense, buzzing with whispered judgments and brittle laughter. Now it was as if the walls themselves had exhaled. Plates lay half-finished on tables. Glasses stood abandoned in little clusters, condensation pooling beneath them. No one wanted to be the first to speak too loudly. I sat at my place near the service door, my hands folded calmly in my lap, the weight of my tote still grounding me. Vindication had arrived in waves, but I let it settle. Silence can do more work than shouting ever will. Cressida, the master of ceremonies, cleared her throat at the microphone. Her voice had lost its bright polish. "We'll correct some oversight," she murmured. Her eyes didn't dare rest on me for more than a heartbeat. She was not promising me anything. She was promising the room that order could still be restored. But order was not what I came for. I did not need apologies carved out of panic. What mattered was action, and action could not be faked. Celine sat at the head table, her spine no longer straight. Her posture spoke more than any speech could, the weight of exposure of consequence of a carefully built facade wobbling on its foundation. For years, I had wondered if she saw me as an anchor or a shadow. Today it was clear she wanted me invisible, but the truth refused invisibility. Slowly, hesitantly, she stood. I watched her make the walk toward me, her heels clicking against the polished floor. There were no cameras now, no spotlight to glamorize her gesture. Just a daughter walking toward her mother, words trembling on her tongue. "The slideshow," she whispered when she reached me, her eyes darting nervously to the tables nearby. "It got away from me." She sounded like a child again, trying to explain away a broken vase. I didn't flinch. "Fix the record," I told her, steady and plain. "From this day forward, tell the truth. Nothing less." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed, her eyes glossing over. For a second, I thought she might reach out, but her hands only twisted together. No hug came. That was fine. Love is not owed. It must be earned. When the MC asked if I'd like to say something, I rose slowly, not to perform, not to bask in any spotlight, but to plant a single stake in the ground. My voice carried across the hall, not loud but even. Motherhood, I said, is not a spotlight. It is a vow. The words hung in the air longer than I expected, simple but unshakable. I thanked the staff who had shown kindness when others withheld it. And then one final request. Please update the photos. Show everyone who stood in the real story, not the curated one. Some faces flushed, some eyes lowered. But a few nodded, and those nods mattered. I reached into my tote. The fabric brushed my hands like an old friend. Out came the hand-stitched blanket, the one I had folded and refolded all day as if rehearsing this moment. I carried it to the gift table, laying it gently on top of shiny paper and bows that already looked gaudy in comparison. Attached was a card, my handwriting steady for your first storms. May you always find warm hands. It was not for Celine, not for Armand, not for anyone clutching champagne. It was for the child who had yet to arrive, the one who would one day search for truth in the stories told about their family. This blanket would speak where others had silenced me. The mood shifted again. A woman from Selena's church stepped forward and touched my arm softly. "We'll help fix the album," she whispered, her words steady, carrying the weight of memory. Another cousin mumbled an apology for laughing earlier. Even Armand, his face drawn tight, muttered something about miscommunication. I let it slide past me. Words are cheap. Time reveals their worth. Celine's voice trembled again as she asked if she could borrow the negatives to scan them into a proper archive. I looked her in the eye. Next week. With me. Together. She nodded, and for the first time that day I saw the faint outline of a bridge rising between us, not repaired, but rebuilt with new timber. Then Vera stood. She didn't need many words, only the right ones. Character, she said, her tone steady, is who shows up, especially when it is inconvenient. This child deserves a grandmother like this. The applause that followed was different, measured, not frantic. Real, not rehearsed. A server approached me with a new place card, crisp and properly printed, and gestured toward an empty chair at the front. I smiled politely, but remained where I was. My seat had been chosen for me all day. This one I chose. When the program limped toward its close, I slipped out before the last song. The Austin sky had gone golden, the kind of light that makes even cracked sidewalks glow. I walked slowly to my car tote, hanging lightly now. Inside, on the passenger seat, it looked smaller, emptier, its most precious burden already given away. But I felt lighter too, as if I had set down not just a blanket, but years of carrying proof no one wanted to see. Love had been delivered. Boundaries had been kept. And the future, though uncertain, would be built on better terms. As I drove, the windows cracked open, the evening air curled into the car and tangled in my hair. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like my story was locked away inside me. It had been heard, witnessed, and planted like a seed. My grandchild would grow in a world where my presence was no longer a question mark. That I thought was enough. That was everything. Looking back, I've learned that silence can be powerful, but truth must never be buried. Family may try to rewrite you out of the story, but your love, your proof, and your dignity remain unshakable. In this country where family roots run deep, we're reminded that respect is earned by action, not appearances. If there's one lesson I'd pass on, it's this. Protect your boundaries, honor your history, and never let anyone convince you that you don't matter. What about you? Have you ever felt pushed aside by your own family? How did you find your strength again? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments. If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 below or let me know where you're watching from. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Together, we'll keep these conversations alive.